At a family dinner, he declared, "My ex will always be part of my life. If you don't accept that, don't marry me. I'm Tiana Caldwell, and I never imagined my life would feel like it was crumbling in front of my own eyes, right in the middle of a fancy dinner." My fiancé, Malcolm Rivers, who I thought was the perfect man, sat across from me with a calm smile, as if he hadn't just dropped the most shocking sentence I've ever heard. "Before I go on, let me tell you, this is going to get messy. Stick with me while I take you through everything, because the whole story is a roller coaster, and you'll want to see how it all unfolds." Malcolm and I had been together for 2 years. I always believed we were perfect for each other. He was charming, successful, and everyone around him seemed to love him. When he asked me to dinner at his parents' house that evening, I thought it would be just another warm, welcoming night, maybe a little fancy, but nothing more. I had no idea it would turn into a moment that would change everything. The room was gorgeous, soft lighting, a beautifully set table, and the faint smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread. Malcolm's parents were there, smiling and talking with warmth that made me feel like I belonged. I had my dress on, my hair done just right, and I felt excited to finally feel fully part of his family. I had no clue that excitement was about to be crushed. We had just finished the appetizers when Malcolm leaned back in his chair, looked directly at me, and said it. "My ex will always be part of my life. If you don't accept that, don't marry me." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. The fork slipped from my hand, and I could hear a quiet gasp from his mother. His father just stared, expressionless, and the whole room went silent. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. How could he say that in front of everyone? I felt humiliated, shocked, and completely blindsided. My heart was racing, and my mind screamed, "What do you mean always part of your life?" I forced a smile, trying to act normal, but inside I was crumbling. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, and I wanted to disappear. Malcolm, on the other hand, looked calm, as if he had just stated the weather. I tried to ask what he meant, and he shrugged, saying something about how she had been important to him and always would be. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about a past relationship. This was about my place in his life, and suddenly, I wasn't sure I even belonged there. I had dreamed about this future, about us, about marrying him, but now I was unsure if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. My stomach twisted, my hands shook, and all I could do was sit there, trying to breathe and figure out what to do next. That dinner, which was supposed to be a celebration of love, became the night I questioned everything I thought I knew about Malcolm and myself. I still remember the first time I met Malcolm. It was at a friend's birthday party, and he just had this way of walking into a room and making everyone feel at ease. He smiled at me like he'd known me forever, and I couldn't help but be drawn in. There was something magnetic about him, his confidence, his laughter, the way he genuinely listened when I spoke. I felt like I had finally met someone who really saw me. Malcolm was successful, ambitious, and had this charm that made people naturally gravitate toward him. He wasn't just talking about his accomplishments. He actually cared about the people around him. He asked thoughtful questions, remembered little details about my life, and made me feel special in a way I hadn't experienced before. Every date felt effortless, like we had known each other far longer than we actually had. From the start, I was sure he was my dream man. He was attentive, affectionate, and never shied away from showing how much he cared. He brought me flowers randomly, sent good morning texts that made me smile, and even remembered the tiny things I mentioned in passing, like how I loved caramel lattes or that I always wanted to visit a certain art exhibit. It felt like he was trying to make every moment with me perfect, and I fell for it completely. Meeting his family only reinforced that feeling. His parents adored me instantly. They asked questions, laughed at my jokes, and included me in conversations like I'd been part of the family for years. Dinner at their house felt warm and welcoming, with Malcolm always there, making sure I felt comfortable. Even his younger sister, who could be shy around strangers, seemed to like me, which made me feel like I truly belonged. It seemed like everything was falling into place exactly as I had hoped. But even in those early days, there were little things that didn't quite add up. Malcolm was evasive when I tried to ask about his past relationships. He'd quickly change the subject or give vague answers, brushing off questions as if they weren't important. At the time, I told myself it was normal. Everyone has a past, right? I didn't want to dig too deep because I liked him so much and didn't want to create unnecessary tension. I ignored the small red flags because everything else seemed perfect. His charm, his attention, his apparent love for family. It all felt so genuine that I convinced myself these little oddities didn't matter. I was caught up in the fantasy of the man he presented to the world, and I let my heart take the lead. Looking back now, I can see the cracks in that picture, but in the moment, all I saw was what I wanted to see, a man who seemed too good to be true, and I wanted to believe he really was. Every memory of those early days with Malcolm still lingers. The laughter, the late-night talks, the way he made me feel like the center of his world. I just didn't realize then that those perfect moments were hiding something I wasn't ready to face. It was a warm Saturday evening when I first met Serena Vaughn. Our mutual friend had thrown a small gathering at her apartment, nothing fancy, just a few friends catching up. Malcolm had invited me, and I was excited to meet more of his circle. I expected a casual, friendly night, but the moment Serena walked in, I felt a chill I couldn't explain. She had this presence that made everyone notice her the second she entered the room. Confident, magnetic, and effortlessly stylish, Serena seemed to command the space without even trying. At first, I told myself it was just her personality, but then I saw the way she looked at Malcolm, an intensity in her eyes that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't subtle. It was like she was marking her territory, making sure I knew she existed and that she mattered. Malcolm introduced us politely, smiling, but I could sense a tension I didn't understand. Serena extended her hand to me, but there was a sharpness in her tone, a slight edge that made the greeting feel less than friendly. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I might be reading too much into it, but my stomach twisted. Malcolm, noticing my unease, leaned toward me and whispered, "She's just dramatic. Don't let it get to you." His words were meant to reassure me, but instead, they planted a tiny seed of doubt. Why would he feel the need to downplay her behavior? As the night went on, Serena hovered around Malcolm more than necessary, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, touching his arm in a way that seemed overly familiar. I kept telling myself it was nothing, but my confidence began to shake. Then, when no one else was paying attention, Serena leaned toward me, her voice low, and whispered, "He'll always come back to me. You'll see." I froze. My mind raced as I tried to process what she had just said. It wasn't a threat exactly, but it was a warning. A reminder that she was still in the picture, that maybe my place beside Malcolm wasn't as secure as I had believed. I looked at him, hoping he would intervene, that he would defend our relationship, but he just smiled awkwardly and changed the subject. That night, I went home feeling uneasy for the first time since we had met. Serena's words replayed in my mind over and over. "He'll always come back to me. You'll see." I didn't know what she meant exactly, but the uncertainty it created gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that Malcolm and Serena shared a history that wasn't as distant as he claimed. Even in the days after that gathering, I found myself noticing little things. How Serena seemed to appear in photos Malcolm had posted, how he occasionally acted differently after hearing her name, small hesitations in his voice. The seed of doubt she had planted grew quietly in my mind. I loved Malcolm and wanted to trust him completely, but a tiny, nagging worry had taken root. Could Serena really still be a part of his life in a way I didn't know? And if so, what did that mean for us? It was the first time I realized that sometimes the people from the past don't just disappear. They linger, quietly reshaping the present in ways you might never expect. After meeting Serena, things with Malcolm started to feel different, though he acted like everything was normal. At first, it was small things, late nights at work, calls he would take in another room, texts he wouldn't show me. I tried to trust him, to believe he was busy or stressed, but the excuses kept piling up. Sometimes he would disappear for hours without telling me where he was, and when I asked, he'd shrug it off with a tired smile, saying it was nothing, just work stuff. One night, I couldn't sleep and decided to grab my phone. I noticed Malcolm had left his messages open on the kitchen counter. Curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked. My heart sank. There it was, messages to someone he called S, filled with jokes, private memories, and words that sounded far too intimate for a client. I quickly put the phone down, trying to convince myself I must be imagining things. The next morning, I asked him about it casually, and he laughed it off, saying, "It's just a client. Work stuff. Don't worry about it." But the laugh didn't reach his eyes, and I could feel the lie in every word. It wasn't just the late-night texts. Serena seemed to know everything about us, even things I hadn't shared with anyone. She would casually mention trips we had taken, arguments we'd had, or private jokes Malcolm and I shared. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe someone told her, or it was just coincidence. But it happened too often, and the way she said things, with that smug smile, made it clear she wasn't guessing. She had inside knowledge, and I realized with a sinking feeling that Malcolm had likely never really cut her out of his life. Every time Malcolm went out late or excused himself to take a call, I started noticing patterns. The timing, the secrecy, the sudden defensiveness when I asked questions. It all began to make sense in a terrible way. The trust one had built for him started to crumble. I began replaying conversations in my mind, picking apart every vague statement, every hesitation, and every unexplained absence. The perfect man I thought I knew seemed to be slipping through my fingers, replaced by someone who might have been hiding pieces of his life I wasn't supposed to see. Even the small things became suspicious. A laugh at a text he received, a subtle smile at a phone notification, or a sudden change in tone when Serena's name came up in conversation. It was like a code I had to learn. And as the days went by, my doubts grew heavier. I loved him, but the signs were impossible to ignore. Something about the way he carried himself, the little lies that didn't quite add up, and Serena's knowing presence made me question everything I had once believed about our relationship. I started keeping a quiet mental record, watching and listening, trying to understand if I was overreacting or if my heart was finally seeing the truth. Deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Malcolm had never truly let Serena go, and every subtle betrayal, every unexplained absence was proof of it. The man I thought I knew, the man I wanted to marry, wasn't exactly who he appeared to be, and that realization filled me with a mix of fear, anger, and heartbreak. I can still see that night so clearly, as if it happened yesterday. The memory of Malcolm's words at the family dinner haunted me. The way he casually announced that Serena would always be part of his life. I remember the stunned silence that followed, the way the room seemed to shrink around me, and the suffocating feeling of being completely exposed in front of his family. His mother sat at the table, fork in hand, cheeks flushed, eyes darting between Malcolm and me. I could see the embarrassment in her expression, but she didn't say a word. His father, on the other hand, merely nodded like he understood something I didn't, like this was somehow normal. And there I sat, frozen, heart racing, unsure whether I should speak up or just pretend I hadn't heard anything. Malcolm looked at me with that calm, confident smile that had once made my heart flutter. "Tiana," he said, leaning in slightly. "She was there for me before anyone else. You can't erase that." The words felt like a trap, as if he was giving me an impossible choice: accept Serena permanently in our lives or step aside. I felt cornered, powerless, and more humiliated than I had ever felt before. It wasn't just a small issue or a minor detail. It was a declaration that Serena would always hold a place in his heart, a place I wasn't allowed to question or challenge. At that moment, I realized something frightening. I wasn't just marrying Malcolm. I was stepping into a life where someone else's shadow would always hang over me, shaping my relationship, my place in his family, and even the way I was expected to feel. It wasn't just about trust or jealousy anymore. It was about living in a constant comparison, a life where someone else's presence would always be stronger than mine. I wanted to argue, to demand that he clarify what he meant, but the words stuck in my throat. His mother's silent disapproval and his father's quiet acknowledgement only added to the weight of the situation. I felt trapped between his love and the undeniable truth that Serena wasn't just a memory. She was an active part of his world, a presence I couldn't ignore. After the dinner, Malcolm tried to smooth things over, brushing it off as if it were just a misunderstanding. "Tiana, I'm not trying to hurt you," he said gently. "I just want you to understand that she'll always be important to me. That doesn't mean you're any less, but she's part of my life, whether we like it or not." Hearing him try to justify it only made me feel smaller. It was a polite way of saying that my feelings didn't really matter, that I was expected to accept this situation without question. That night, I lay awake thinking about what I had signed up for, realizing that being with Malcolm meant more than loving him. It meant navigating a world where someone else would always be first. Serena wasn't just a person from his past. She was a permanent fixture, and I had no choice but to live in her shadow if I stayed. It was one of those moments that changes how you see everything. I loved Malcolm, yes, but suddenly love wasn't enough. Not when it came with a constant reminder that someone else would always be part of him, part of us. And in that realization, I knew things could never be the same. I never thought I'd see it, but that evening changed everything. Malcolm had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he stepped out to grab a drink, and for some reason, curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, intending to check a message he'd asked me to respond to for him, and then my eyes fell on the open chat with Serena. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought it couldn't be what it looked like. But as I read, the truth hit me like a punch. The messages weren't casual. They were intimate, flirty even, full of inside jokes and shared memories that no friend would have. They were still emotionally involved, and the way he wrote to her, soft, familiar, teasing, made it impossible to deny. My mind raced. How could he do this? How could he be pretending with me all this time while keeping this connection alive? As I scrolled, my heart broke a little more. He wasn't just talking to Serena. He was comparing me to her. There were lines about how I reminded him of Serena in certain ways, mixed with subtle complaints or observations, almost like he was grading me against her. Every compliment I had thought was genuine, every moment of intimacy, suddenly felt tainted. The realization was like ice in my veins. I had been living in a carefully constructed illusion, and now the walls had come crashing down. I felt a surge of anger, betrayal, and confusion. How long had this been going on? Did he ever care about me the way I thought he did? Or had I just been a placeholder while he kept Serena close? I felt sick to my stomach, my hands trembling, my mind spinning through memories, replaying moments that now seemed like lies. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I closed the messages, locked the phone, and placed it back exactly where it had been, acting as if nothing had happened. On the outside, I stayed calm, smiling, talking to him like always, hiding the storm inside. No one could know what I had discovered. Not yet. I needed time, needed to think, needed to plan. As I walked away from the counter, my mind started turning. If he could betray me this way so quietly, then I had to be smart too. I began thinking about what I could do, how I could protect myself, and maybe even how I could make sure he faced the consequences of what he had done. The fire of betrayal ignited something else, a quiet determination. I wasn't going to let him ruin me or humiliate me further. For the first time, I realized I needed a strategy. I couldn't let my emotions control me, or I'd make mistakes. I would watch, wait, and plan carefully. Malcolm thought he was the only one playing the game, but now, quietly, I was too. I couldn't let anyone see my pain, not him, not Serena, not anyone. And so, I began to move through the day pretending nothing had happened, while secretly letting the betrayal fuel a plan that I would carry out when the time was right. It was devastating, yes, but in that heartbreak, a seed of resolve had been planted. I wasn't broken. Not yet. And I wasn't going to stay silent forever. I kept smiling like nothing had happened, but inside I was cold and measured. Instead of blowing up or begging for answers, I played the part of the dutiful fiancé. I answered calls, went to family dinners, and laughed at Malcolm's jokes, all while putting distance between us without making a scene. I learned how to be polite and quiet at the same time. Close enough that no one suspected, distant enough that he noticed. That gap became my cover. When he asked if I was okay, I gave him a soft, "I'm fine," and moved the conversation along. I listened when he talked about work, nodded when his family praised him, and never made a scene. People think being calm means you've given up. For me, it was the opposite. Being calm let me see the whole picture. It gave me time to plan instead of reacting. I started watching him closely, learning his patterns. Late nights, sudden silences, that little smile when his phone buzzed. They all told me where to focus. But I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed someone who understood the family, someone who knew how things worked behind the polite smiles. That's when I reached out to Jalen Booker, Malcolm's cousin. I kept it casual at first, coffee, small talk, but Jalen was easy to read. He was kind, tired of the family drama, and quietly honest in a way that made it safe to ask the hard questions. Jalen didn't lie. He told me things I wished I hadn't had to hear. The family had always whispered about Malcolm and Serena. They thought he wasn't fully over her. He had a history of drifting back to who he'd known longest, even when he promised otherwise. Jalen admitted he and other cousins had suspected Malcolm cheated before, that he had a pattern of starting fresh and then circling back to Serena when things got hard. Hearing it from inside the family felt like salt poured into a fresh wound, but it also made everything clearer. The ugly truths stacked up. Stories of secret calls, unexplained trips, and apologies that never changed behavior. It wasn't just one mistake, it was a pattern. Once I saw the pattern, I stopped hoping for a simple explanation. I stopped waiting for him to choose me. Instead, I started thinking about how to make him feel the cost of those choices in a way he couldn't ignore. I decided to aim at what mattered to him most: his reputation, his pride, and how his family saw him. He had built his life on being the confident, reliable one. If I could show that his image was false, that he'd been dishonest under the family's noses, it would cut deeper than any private fight. Reputation would make them question him. Pride would force him to react. Family approval would be the hardest hit, because he craved it more than anything. So I began collecting small things. Dates he couldn't explain, messages that didn't match his stories, casual confirmations from people who had seen more than they'd said. I kept notes, screenshots, and quiet conversations with Jalen to confirm what I suspected. My plan wasn't loud or immediate. It was careful, built to expose him where it would hurt most, where everyone would see the truth, and where he would have no safe place to hide. The night of the family gathering arrived, and I felt a strange mix of nerves and calm. Everything had to be precise. I didn't want yelling or tears. I wanted quiet, undeniable truth. Malcolm was smiling, introducing me to distant relatives and friends, completely unaware that the night would turn everything upside down. I kept my composure, waiting for the right moment. When dessert was served and the conversation lulled, I gently cleared my throat. All eyes turned to me. "There's something I need to share," I said, my voice steady. Malcolm's smile faltered just slightly, but he didn't know what was coming. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, keeping it facing the table so everyone could see. "I think it's time everyone knew the truth," I continued. "About Malcolm and Serena." I opened the messages I had carefully saved, scrolling to the ones that proved exactly what I had discovered. The room went quiet, and I could feel Malcolm's panic building as I read aloud lines that made it painfully clear he had never been honest with me, or anyone. "I miss you already," I read, voice steady. "Can't wait to see you tonight. And here's another one. You're still the only one I want." I let the words hang in the air for a moment. This isn't just friendship, and it hasn't been for a long time. You've been hiding this from me, from your family, and pretending I was the only one in your life. Serena, who was standing nearby, smirked slightly, like she was enjoying the chaos, but Malcolm's face turned pale. He stammered, tried to interrupt, tried to deny it, but his words sounded hollow, weak against the proof in front of everyone. I could see the shift in the room immediately. His family's polite smiles vanished, replaced by shocked silence. His mother covered her face with her hands and left the room, embarrassed and quiet. His father's usual calm expression wavered. He looked at Malcolm in disbelief, unable to reconcile the son he thought he knew with the man before him. The cousins, aunts, and uncles exchanged awkward glances, the atmosphere thick with tension. Malcolm's confidence, the image he had carefully curated, was crumbling in real time. I took a deep breath, meeting his eyes calmly. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice clear. "I can't be in a relationship with someone who hides the truth, someone who compares me to someone else while pretending I'm enough. This engagement is over." I put my phone down, straightened my shoulders, and walked out. The air was heavy with silence behind me, and I could feel the sting of humiliation radiating from Malcolm. He shouted something after me, but I didn't look back. I knew he had lost more than just me. He had lost the image he had worked so hard to protect, and everyone had seen it. That night, as I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and liberation. I had loved him, yes, but I had also reclaimed my power. The betrayal had been exposed, and the weight of the truth was finally visible to everyone, including Malcolm. I walked away knowing I had ended it on my terms, leaving him with nothing but the consequences of his own actions. The days after that night were surreal. My phone blew up with messages and missed calls from Malcolm, each one more desperate than the last. "Please, Tiana, we can fix this," one read. Another begged, "I made a mistake. I need you." But I didn't reply. Not once. I blocked his number, his emails, and every social media account I knew he had. Every attempt to reach me ended in silence, and with each failed attempt, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I wasn't giving him the chance to twist my heart again. I had taken back control, and I wasn't about to let him steal it back. Serena, on the other hand, seemed to think she had won. I could see it in her posts, the subtle gloating, the little smirks she threw in public when Malcolm was nearby. She acted like the victor in some game, as if I no longer existed in the picture. But the reality quickly became clear to her. Malcolm's family, once quiet and reserved about their opinions, now made their disapproval obvious. They treated her coldly, their smiles stiff, their greetings polite but distant. Every glance carried judgment, a quiet condemnation that grew with each interaction. The realization hit Serena hard. She wasn't welcomed as she imagined, and her influence over Malcolm's life wasn't as strong as she thought. Meanwhile, Malcolm's reputation began to crumble in ways he couldn't control. Through the family network, rumors spread, quiet at first, then louder, about his betrayal, the hidden relationship, and the humiliation he faced in front of everyone. Colleagues who once admired him started to look at him differently, questioning his judgment and character. Invitations he would normally receive vanished, and whispers followed him wherever he went. The professional image he had carefully built over years, the charming, reliable man everyone trusted, was tarnished. Everywhere Malcolm went, the consequences of his actions followed him. Friends he had considered close grew distant, hesitant to involve themselves in his personal drama. Even those who were neutral started whispering when his name came up, connecting the dots between his private failings and the public fallout. He had constructed this perfect image of a man in control, admired by family and colleagues alike. But it all collapsed in the span of one night. And I watched quietly from the sidelines, feeling a mix of vindication and relief. I wasn't gloating. I was simply witnessing the natural consequences of actions he had chosen for himself. The man who had thought he could deceive and manipulate those around him was now facing the reality of his choices, and there was nothing he could do to rebuild what had been lost. In the silence after the chaos, I realized just how fragile appearances could be. Malcolm had counted on loyalty, charm, and secrecy to maintain his perfect life, but the truth had exposed every flaw. His image, carefully crafted and polished for years, lay in pieces, and there was no one to put it back together. And for the first time, I felt completely free, not just from him, but from the fear, uncertainty, and heartbreak he had caused me. Months had passed since that night, and life had begun to feel steady again. I often found myself reflecting on everything: Malcolm, Serena, the betrayal, and the carefully executed plan that had finally brought clarity and justice to my life. At first, the memories stung sharply, each one a reminder of how deeply I had been hurt. But over time, the pain had softened into lessons, and those lessons had shaped me in ways I hadn't expected. I thought about the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, and the doubt that had gnawed at me from the moment Serena appeared. I remembered the tension, the quiet fury, and the careful plotting that had carried me through those weeks. Each moment had been difficult, yes, but they had also been empowering. I realized that leaving Malcolm, exposing the betrayal, and reclaiming my life wasn't just about revenge. It was about standing up for myself, about refusing to be diminished, ignored, or manipulated any longer. It had been hard, but walking away had been the bravest choice I had ever made. Life after Malcolm was quieter, but it was real. There were no games, no hidden messages, no uneasy smiles masking secrets. The freedom was intoxicating. I didn't have to second-guess anyone's intentions or apologize for trusting my instincts. I could live my life on my own terms, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. That evening, I met Jalen and his girlfriend for dinner at a small, cozy restaurant we had all come to love. The lights were soft, the atmosphere relaxed, and there was laughter around our table, genuine, warm, and free of any tension. We shared stories, joked about minor mishaps in our week, and sipped wine while watching the city lights flicker outside the window. For the first time in a long while, I could just be present, fully in the moment, without shadows of past betrayals looming over me. I caught myself laughing without restraint, feeling light and unburdened. Jalen reached across the table and lightly touched my hand, a quiet gesture of friendship and support, and I felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had helped me see the truth when I was too blinded by love and trust to face it myself. More than that, he had been a steady presence, showing me that family could be chosen. That support didn't have to come from those who had hurt you. As dinner came to a close, I took a deep breath and let the memories of the past drift away. Malcolm, Serena, the betrayal, and the humiliation were all behind me now, locked safely in the past. I had survived it all, and in surviving, I had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident than I had ever been. I smiled at Jalen and his girlfriend, feeling a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in years. And I realized, quietly but firmly, that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying someone else's life. It's refusing to let them keep destroying yours. That thought lingered with me as we left the restaurant, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely free. What would you have done if you were in Tiana's shoes? Walk away from someone you loved after discovering their betrayal, or try to make it work despite everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear your take. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new one.